I used to love working the closing shift. There was something peaceful about it. Cleaning up after the last customers, the quiet hum of the espresso machine, the soft glow of streetlights filtering through the windows. But that was before I realized I wasn't alone. It started with the notes. At first, I thought it was just my manager leaving reminders. A sticky note on the register, lock the back door. Another one on the fridge, don't forget the lights. Basic closing instructions. Nothing weird. But then, a few days later, I found a note that wasn't from my manager. It was on the supply closet door, written in shaky handwriting. Don't look at him. I frowned, peeling the note off the door. It was different from the others. The paper was older, slightly crumpled, like it had been there a while. A bad joke, maybe? I rolled my eyes and tossed it in the trash. Then I grabbed the cleaning supplies and went back to work. By midnight, I had locked up and was heading for the exit when I noticed something odd. The note was back, right where it had been before. A sharp prickle of unease crawled down my spine. I checked the trash can. Empty. I stared at the note for a long moment, then slowly reached up and pulled it down again. I crumpled it into a tight ball, shoved it into my pocket, and stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face. I exhaled shakily, glancing around the empty parking lot. Everything was still. Normal. I was just being paranoid. At least, that's what I told myself. Until I checked my reflection. The shop had large windows, and as I turned to lock the door, I caught my own reflection in the glass. Except, it wasn't quite right. I could see myself, keys in hand, coat zipped up, but my reflection was delayed. Just by a second, like it was watching me before deciding to copy my movements. I froze. Slowly, my reflection tilted its head, but I hadn't moved. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat, and the lights inside the coffee shop flickered. I ran to my car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I didn't stop until I was safely inside, doors locked, engine running. I forced myself to breathe, gripping the steering wheel. Then, cautiously, I glanced back at the shop. The lights were off now. The interior was pitch black. But just before I pulled out of the lot, something moved. A shadow in the window, tall, watching, and in the faint glow of the street lamp, I saw a single white note pressed against the glass. From where I sat, I could just barely make out the words. Don't look at him. I called my manager the next morning, told him what happened. His response, that's weird. That's it. That's all he said. Like it was nothing. Like this had happened before. And then, before I could ask any more questions, he said, you're covering the closing shift again tonight, right? I wanted to quit. Wanted to tell him to find someone else. But rent wasn't going to pay itself. So that night, I came back. The shop looked normal again. Bright. Warm. Like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me. Something I had let in. Everything was fine at first. A few late-night customers. Some college kids cramming for exams. By 10:30, the place was empty. I locked the front door. Checked the back. Made sure every window was shut. I wasn't making the same mistake twice. Then, just as I was wiping down the counter, I heard a knock. It was soft. Not at the front door. Not the back. Somewhere closer. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The sound came again. A tap, tap, tap. Not from a door. From the supply closet. The door was closed, but the knocking continued. Like someone was on the other side. Waiting. I stared, my pulse roaring in my ears. Then, without thinking, I took a step forward. Then another. I placed my hand on the doorknob. The air felt too cold. Too still. I hesitated. And then I remembered. The note. Don't look at him. I let go of the doorknob and took a step back. The knocking stopped immediately. A long silence pressed against the room. And then, a whisper. Right from the other side of the door. You saw me. I didn't wait. Didn't check the cameras. Didn't even turn off the lights. I grabbed my keys and ran. By the time I made it to my car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I didn't look back. I just drove. I called my manager the next morning. Told him I was done. That I wasn't coming back. His response, yeah, that makes sense. Like he had been expecting it. And before he hung up, he said something that still haunts me. Whatever you do, don't check your rearview mirror. I didn't. I couldn't. I drove straight home, locked the doors, and turned on every light in my apartment. I didn't sleep. Didn't move. And I definitely, absolutely did not check any mirrors. But even now, I still feel it. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck. like something is standing just behind me, waiting, watching. And one day, I know I'm going to forget. Forget the rule. Forget the warning. And the second I glance at my reflection, I know I won't be the only one looking back. Working the night shift at a coffee shop isn't supposed to be scary. Boring? Sure. Exhausting? Absolutely. But terrifying? Never. At least, that's what I thought, until the man in the black coat came in. It was late, just after 1 a.m., and the shop was empty. It was just me, the low hum of the espresso machine, and the buzz of the neon sign in the window. I was wiping down the counter when I saw him. A tall man, standing just outside the glass door. Not moving, not knocking, just standing there. His coat was too long, brushing against his ankles, and his hands were tucked into the pockets. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the menu above the counter, like he was reading it, like he had all the time in the world. Then, without taking his eyes off the menu, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Something about the way he moved made my skin prickle. His steps were too smooth, like his feet weren't actually touching the floor. He didn't acknowledge me at first, didn't say anything, just stared at the menu. The longer he stood there, the more unsettled I felt. Hey, I said, forcing a polite smile. Can I get you something? A long pause. Then, finally, his head tilted slightly. What do you recommend? His voice was flat, not deep, not high, just wrong, like it was missing something. I swallowed. Well, the caramel macchiato is pretty popular. His lips twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything. Then, in the same monotone voice, I'll take that. I turned to make the drink, but I could feel him watching me. Not in the usual way customers do. His stare was heavy, like it was physically pressing against my back. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I forced myself to focus. Steamed the milk. Poured the espresso. Drizzled the caramel. When I turned back around, he was closer, standing right at the counter. He hadn't made a sound, hadn't moved a muscle, just appeared there. I nearly dropped the cup. Here you go, I said, my voice unsteady. He took the drink without blinking. Then he spoke again. Do you ever feel like you're being watched? A cold shiver ran down my spine. I let out a nervous chuckle. I mean, I work in customer service, so yeah. He didn't laugh, didn't react, just tilted his head again. And then, in that same emotionless voice, they watch you all the time, you know. My grip tightened on the counter. Who does? A pause. Then, softly, the ones in the mirrors. I forced a smile, trying to ignore the churning dread in my stomach. That's interesting. He didn't blink. You don't believe me? I exhaled slowly. Look, man, it's late. Do you, need anything else? His eyes flickered, like he had just remembered where he was. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I had just started to relax when I noticed. He had left his drink on the counter. I frowned. Hey, you forgot your... I stopped. He was gone. The door hadn't opened. The bell hadn't chimed. He had just vanished. I grabbed the cup and peered inside. The caramel macchiato was untouched, but something was floating in the foam. I squinted. A single black eyelash. No, not an eyelash. A tiny, curved piece of metal. A camera lens. A sick feeling settled in my gut. I turned toward the security cameras, checking the monitor behind the counter. I rewound the footage, watching the moment he walked in. And then my blood ran cold. Because in the reflection of the glass door, I could see myself standing behind the counter. But I couldn't see him. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. This wasn't real. I was tired. Overworked. That was the only explanation. I took a deep breath and forced myself to finish cleaning. By the time I locked up and stepped outside, the city was eerily quiet. No cars. No people. Just the distant hum of a flickering street lamp. I started walking to my car, my heartbeat finally slowing. Then, just as I reached the driver's side door, a chill wrapped around my spine, like someone was standing right behind me, watching. I turned around, expecting to see him, but there was no one there. Just my own reflection in the coffee shop window. My breath caught in my throat, because in the glass, my reflection was smiling. But I wasn't. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't move from my bed. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a stress-induced hallucination. But the next morning, when I went back to work, my manager was waiting for me. His expression was pale, tense. Hey, he said, were you messing with the security cameras last night? I frowned. No. What? He swallowed, then turned his laptop around. I stopped breathing. The screen showed the security footage from my shift. The cafe, the counter, me. But the man in the black coat? He was never there. I quit that same day. I don't know what I saw. Don't know if he was real, or if something else was watching me through him. But sometimes, when I walk past shop windows or glance into bathroom mirrors, I swear I see his second reflection, not following my movements, not mimicking me, just standing there, smiling, waiting. I always hated closing shifts. The coffee shop was fine during the day, bright, busy, filled with the comforting hum of conversation and espresso machines. But at night, when the doors were locked, the lights dimmed, and the world outside had gone quiet, the place felt wrong, like I wasn't alone. I had worked at the Hollow Bean for almost a year. It was one of those trendy little coffee shops tucked between a bookstore and a candle shop, the kind of place that had handwritten menus and indie music playing softly in the background. I usually worked mornings, but that week, my manager had me covering closing shifts. It wasn't a big deal. At least, that's what I thought. Until the night I stayed too late. It started small. A flickering light near the storage room. A coffee cup I was sure I had put away, mysteriously back on the counter. I figured I was just tired. I had been on my feet all day, wiping tables, making drinks, listening to customers complain about the Wi-Fi. By the time 10:30 rolled around, I was exhausted. I locked the doors, turned off the music, and started my closing routine. Mopping the floors, wiping down the espresso machines, checking inventory. Everything was normal, until I heard the knock. It came from the back door. Not the main entrance, the employee entrance. A single, slow knock. Then another. I frowned. No one should be back there. Employees use that door during the day, but by closing time, it was locked from the inside. Another knock. I hesitated before stepping closer. "Hello?" I called. Silence. Then, a voice. Low. Flat. "You forgot to lock the front door." Sick feeling settled in my stomach. I turned toward the front entrance. The glass doors were shut. Locked. I had checked them myself. I turned back to the employee door, and my breath caught in my throat. The handle was turning. I ran. Straight to the storage room, slamming the door behind me. My hand shook as I reached for my phone. No signal. My heart pounded. This wasn't happening. This was a joke, right? A prank? Then I heard it. A creaking noise. Not from the door. From the vent above me. I tilted my head back slowly. The vent cover was loose. Like someone had been there recently. The air inside was too dark, like it led somewhere deeper than it should. A thought struck me. What if whoever was at the back door wasn't alone? What if they were already inside? I barely had time to process that thought before I heard it. A soft, dragging noise. Like something was moving inside the vent. Coming toward me. I bolted. I didn't care if someone was outside. I had to get out. I burst out of the storage room, sprinting toward the front door. I grabbed the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit them into the lock. Then, a whisper. Right behind me. "You forgot to check the cameras." I spun around. No one. Just the dimly lit cafe, the espresso machine humming softly. My pulse roared in my ears as I turned toward the register, where the security monitors were. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew nothing good would come from it. But I did it anyway. And what I saw still haunts me. The cameras were glitching. Static flickered across the screens, distorting the footage. But through the flickers, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The back door camera. It showed someone standing outside. Tall. Motionless. But their face was blurred. Like the camera couldn't focus on them. Then the screen jumped, and suddenly, they were inside. I staggered back, my chest tightening. That wasn't possible. I had been watching the door the whole time. The footage glitched again. The figure was closer now. Another glitch. Now they were right behind the counter. Then the screen cut to black. A sound broke through the silence. Drip, drip, drip. I turned my head toward the espresso machine. A slow, steady drip of liquid seeped from the nozzle. Not coffee. Something darker. Something thicker. A chill wrapped around my spine. And then, from behind me, the whisper came again. "You forgot to lock the door." I don't remember leaving. 1 second, I was standing in the shop. The next, I was outside, gasping for breath, the cold night air slicing into my lungs. I ran to my car, shoving the keys into the ignition. Sped off without looking back. I called my manager the next morning and quit on the spot. Didn't explain why. Didn't answer when they asked me to come pick up my last paycheck. I don't care. A month later, the cafe closed down. Something about a break-in. Something about an employee disappearing. I didn't want to know more. But sometimes, late at night, I get a craving for coffee. And when I pass by an empty storefront, long abandoned, I swear I can still hear it. The faint sound of dripping liquid. And a voice, barely above a whisper. You forgot to lock the door. I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped into that coffee shop. There was nothing overtly strange about it, just another small, independent cafe nestled between two larger buildings. The kind of place that blended into the background, unnoticed unless you were looking for it. But from the moment I walked in, something felt off. I was in town for a business conference, running on zero sleep after a brutal red-eye flight. I needed caffeine badly. The cafe didn't seem like much from the outside. A faded wooden sign above the door read Maple Roast, though the paint was chipped and peeling. Inside, it was dimly lit, with rustic wooden floors and a few scattered tables. A soft jazz tune played in the background, barely audible over the low hum of conversation. Behind the counter stood a barista, a young woman in her mid-20s with tired eyes and dark hair pulled into a messy bun. Her name tag read Lena. She looked up and gave me a polite smile as I approached. Good morning. What can I get for you? Just a black coffee. Large. No sugar. She nodded and turned toward the espresso machine. I stepped aside, pulling out my phone to check my emails, barely paying attention until I saw her hand move. She reached beneath the counter, pulled out a small white packet, and tore it open. Then, without hesitation, she poured the contents into my coffee. I froze. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Maybe it was sugar. Maybe she thought I had asked for it. But something about the way she did it, so quickly, so deliberately, made my stomach twist. She stirred the coffee, her eyes flickering toward me just once, as if checking if I had noticed. Then she slid the cup across the counter, forcing a strained smile. There you go. One black coffee. I didn't take it. Instead, I looked her in the eye and asked, as casually as I could, You didn't add anything to this, did you? For a split second, she hesitated. Then she shook her head, too quickly. Nope. Just black coffee. Exactly how you wanted it. Her fingers twitched slightly. A strange, cold dread slithered down my spine. I forced a smile. Right. Thanks. I picked up the cup but didn't drink it. And as I turned toward the door, it locked. I spun around. Lena was standing in front of the door now, her expression flat, unreadable. You can't leave. The words were soft, calm, but there was something unnatural about them. My grip on the cup tightened. I have a meeting to get to, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You have to drink your coffee here, she replied. Her eyes didn't blink. The cafe had fallen eerily silent. I glanced around. A few minutes ago, there had been other customers. An old man by the window. A couple whispering in the corner. A businessman hunched over a laptop. But now, the cafe was empty. It was just me, and her, and the two men stepping out from the back room. They were big, dressed in black. One of them, a bald guy with a thick neck, cracked his knuckles. The other, thinner but just as unsettling, smiled slightly. Lena didn't move, didn't even acknowledge them. She just tilted her head and whispered, Drink it. My pulse skyrocketed. Every fiber of my being screamed at me not to touch that coffee. But I was trapped. If I drank it, I didn't know what would happen. If I didn't, I knew exactly what would. So I did the only thing I could think of. I threw the cup. Scalding hot coffee splashed across the bald guy's arm. He roared in pain. And in that split second, I ran. I bolted toward the door, yanking at the handle. It didn't budge. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps pounding against the wooden floor. My brain scrambled for options. Windows. Back exit. Anything. Then I saw it. A small service door leading to the kitchen. I sprinted toward it just as I heard Lena's voice, cold and sharp. Stop him. I crashed through the door into the back kitchen. Stainless steel counters. Shelves stacked with coffee beans and cups. And at the far end, another door. I didn't stop to think. I shoved through it and stumbled into a dark, empty alley. I didn't stop running. Not until I was 3 blocks away, panting, hands shaking, my mind racing. It was only then that I realized I was still holding the coffee cup lid, the plastic piece, still warm from the liquid, and written on the inside, in smudged black ink, was a message. Don't come back. I took the lid to a lab later that evening. The results? The coffee had contained a dangerously high dose of fentanyl. enough to knock me out in minutes, maybe even kill me. I reported everything to the police. But when they went to investigate there was no Maple Roast Cafe. The address led to a vacant building, abandoned for years. No business records. No employees named Lena. No men matching the descriptions I gave them. Nothing. I don't know what I walked into that day. And I never, ever want to find out. But sometimes, when I pass by certain streets, I swear I can smell the faint scent of coffee and something else. Something rotten. And when I turn to look, for just a split second, I see a familiar figure, standing inside a coffee shop that shouldn't exist. Watching me, smiling, waiting. Please like and subscribe. Every bit of support means the world.